Hello, welcome to Special Super Uber Bonus Video 7.8. I'm going to be going over some additional things. I'm also going to make a video after this, which will be 7.9, but this one is going to cover enemy variants and how to start on mini bosses, and that kind of thing. So what I've done is I've created a basic enemy variant. I didn't take too much time to do this, so it's pretty primitive, but if I run the game, I can kind of show you what's going on here. So eventually a different kind of, oh darn it, hold on a second. Eventually you'll see a different type of enemy spawn. You just saw him there. He had the big red thing on his top of his balloon type thing. It's just a red kind of square type dealie, and he kind of moves a little bit differently. So that's all I'm after from you guys for mini bosses, is just something that moves a little bit differently. Yours might move down then up or something like that, or maybe it moves backwards, something like that. Just the idea is that it would change, move direction. Now, to pull this off, I made a bunch of changes and to the ending shooter that we came up with, and I'm going to upload these for you so you have a starting point to work on the bosses. But first I want to show you a program that I've used. It's called Beyond Compare. Beyond Compare is a really nice comparison utility that lets you take two different directories and compare them against the other and see what the changes are. So I've taken that and basically run it through to see what the changes I've made, because I've made a whole bunch of changes and I was kind of doing this quickly, so I wanted to be able to show you all these changes. And I'm just going to show them to you, and then I'm going to walk you through them. So to start with, we've got the shooter, which is where we ended up last time, shooter end. That's where we ended. And then we've got shooter shooting things. This is the new one that I made with the new enemy that moves downwards. So oops, I didn't want to do that. All of the things that are equivalent are going to be marked with an equal sign here. As you can see, boss.cs is new, enemy.cs is changed. There's a not equal sign there. That's equal. Game1.cs looks like that's changed as well. Just running down the list. Thumbnail has not changed. Parallaxing background has not changed. Player.cs has not changed. Program.cs has not changed. Projectile.cs has not changed. Shooter CS proj changed, but I'm not going to worry about that. That's just the CS project file changes that have been made. So the three big ones are basically I've added boss, and then I've changed a bunch of stuff in enemy.cs and game1.cs. Let's start on boss. So boss is basically a new file that's been created, and we'll be going over this in great detail in the when we switch over to Visual Studio. So we'll do that one. Next up, we've got enemy. Enemy, what I've done is I've added the isBoss field and the title safe area Y, title safe area height, and I'll get into the details of why I had to add those in a little bit. I've also added a public to the move speed so I can modify that, and that can actually change with time. Oops, sorry, just had to modify my settings there for Windows 7. This computer's been going kind of slow. I'm on the upstairs computer right now, which is my slow one. I've also had to add a set timers function, which I'm going to use to set some enemy timers so it moves up and down. I've made initialize into a virtual. The reason I made that into a virtual is so that I can override it. Finally, I did a virtual on update so I can override that. So the boss the boss is basically going to have his own initialize and his own update. Now you can see that change by looking at boss, because boss has initialize here and update here, and he's going to do his specific stuff. In game1.cs we've added a mini boss, enemy mini boss. We've added a boss spawn time, a previous boss spawn time, and a boss texture. So basically the boss is going to have his own texture as well, and he's going to have his own spawn time, and that's going to be the duration they spawn. Now if you had mini bosses, that would be how often they actually spawn. There's also a texture I've added, and I've added a oh, explosion was added from last time, so never mind that. And here is the add boss function, and I had to change update enemies, so it adds a boss, and then I had to make sure that bosses can explode. And that looks like it's about it. I also have actually a collision section for the bosses, which is new. You might want to pause this and write that down. I am going to go through this as well. And then a sprite batch section. So the way this looks, so here is our project file. As you can see I added boss. So I've got a boss.cs file I added, which derives from enemy. So I put the colon here, and that means that it derives from enemy, and it's going to inherit everything that enemy already has, which is what we want. The difference here is we want to change direction occasionally. So I put in a direction boolean, and then I put in some times for when the boss changes direction and for how long it's allowed to change direction for. I also put in some stuff to set if it's going up or down, and to randomly change that direction. First I'm going to do a set timers. In set timers I'm going to basically say this is the time that I'm going to change the direction, and I have to pass in game time to this, and then I say in 1 second basically I'm going to change direction. And I initialize that, and I roll a random die here, basically just a two-sided die rather. And I just say new random, and if random.next1 equals 1, in other words if it was a 1 then I'm going up. Otherwise I'm going down, so up is going to be false otherwise, which essentially is going to mean down. I also call base initialize here, and what that does is it calls the base class. So it's going to call into enemy initialize, which is here, and that's going to set up all the basic enemy fundamentals that boss is also going to have. Now one thing I had to do is I put the word override inside of initialize, so that whenever I call initialize on a boss, it's going to call into this method instead of the enemy method. Also what that meant is in enemy I had to write the word virtual in front of the thing for initialize, and virtual in front of the set timers as well, and virtual in front of the update, so that it can actually override those versions. Now inside update I'm basically going to say, okay, is it time, this line here, if game time dot total game time greater than boss change direction time, basically says, okay, is it time to change direction? And if it is, and if I have not changed direction already, then I'm going to say that I changed direction, and I'm going to set an expire time, which is going to be the total game time that has elapsed so far, plus about 0.4 seconds. Now in reality, magic numbers like this, we call these magic numbers 0.4, are not good to be setting, but this is just sort of a quick demo, so it's probably fine for that. Normally you want to have those as like a some sort of a static, for example, or a const, but it is okay for the purpose of this project. Alright, so then what we do is we say if we're going up, we just subtract the position.y from the enemy move speed. Otherwise we assume we're going down. We add it. The clamp, actually what that does is it clamps it so that we don't go above the title safe area. It clamps the position.y to somewhere between the number 0 and the title safe area y plus title safe area height, and that'll make sure that it's somewhere between these ranges. Title safe area y is the start of the y plus the safe area height, so that it means it'll be basically if our window, just use a notepad window here, if our window is something like this where we've got title safe area y, title safe area height is here, so we're going to make sure that this value here is never eclipsed, basically. It never goes past this. In reality, in my code, you saw that occasionally the ship would kind of clip off on the side, so we might want to subtract a few more units from that, but I'm going to leave that as it is for now. Also, here is where we set the time to stop changing direction. So in this case, we say change direction equals false. And we say boss change direction time equals total game time plus time span from seconds. So if he lives longer than 3 seconds, he'll change direction again. And that's about it for boss. Enemy had quite a few changes as well, as we could see from before. We had the title safe area, we had the set timers, and the virtuals. So those are the changes in enemy. And then game as well had some changes. Game basically has a new add boss. Let's see what else is in game. I'm going to go back to my Beyond Compare. Game also had changes in tons of changes actually. A bunch of changes in we added the first off we added the variables at the top for the mini boss. We'll just go down from the top to the bottom. How about that? So here we added the mini boss, the boss time, the boss texture, previous boss time. We go down to our initialize and we see that we now have a boss spawn time. So it's going to spawn after 5 seconds. Now mini boss is initially going to get set to null. This means at first there is no mini boss, so we set it to a null reference. We'll talk about null reference pointers in a little bit. Here we get to load content. Inside of load content we're going to make a new boss texture, which is going to be called boss animation. And I made a really primitive thing in GIMP. I just loaded it up with the previous animation, and I just stuck an arrow on top of all of these mines with the little balloons. Now, in reality, I'd like you to do something a little bit more complex with this. You don't have to get too crazy with the art. If you are artistically kind of motivated and adept at that kind of thing, feel free to make anything you want in here. I just simply want to be able to see from the programming point of view that you kind of have grasped the concept. This is a programming course, not an art course. So for now, I just want it to be some difference, and this was a good enough difference for me in my mini boss. So that is the new boss animation. I also had to click on shooter content and go to add existing item, and then find the new PNG that I made, which was down here, right there. And then I just click on that and I add that, and that shows up under this menu. If it doesn't show up under this folder, it will not load. Okay, so next up I had to add a add boss, which initializes it to that boss texture, to that position. It also calls set timers to set up our, remember those set up our timers. Now set timers, even though it says enemy here, it calls into boss because of inheritance. And even if it says initialize here, it calls into boss because of inheritance, because remember we put the word override on the initialize and virtual on the initialize, and virtual inside of the enemy means that when it sees the override, it goes to the boss.cs file where we've got our initialize, and that's how that works. So also we set the title safe areas. Now inside of update enemies, I've also got a check here. This is a null reference check to see if there is a boss. Then we will update it, and we will make sure that we kill it appropriately when it dies. We also had to add collision to the boss, and collision is added via this. Basically, if mini boss is null, we don't do anything additional with the collisions. Now this is, I put this in here for a reason. I put this here, this if mini boss equals null to return, as just sort of an illustration of the danger in doing this kind of thing. This is fine to do, but you just got to realize it when you are doing it, because what's going to happen is none of this, the rest of this code is going to get executed if the mini boss is null. So if there's no mini boss, we've finished our collisions. What that means is if you go back and add collisions, for example, if we're going to add collisions for power-ups or something like that, we're going to want to add them above this line, because they're not going to get processed if in the case where the mini boss is null after this line, because we've got a return statement here. But in any case, now I go through and I make my rectangle for the mini boss. I see if it's intersecting. I decrease the health if it is, and then I check all the projectiles versus the mini boss's collision. And that's pretty much it. I make sure to draw the mini boss as well. This was actually one thing that it took me, like, I was sitting here debugging this for about 15 minutes trying to figure out, well, I got everything done, and the guy wasn't showing up, and it turns out it's because I was not drawing the mini boss. So that's that's a common mistake, is you just might forget to draw it. But anyway, it's drawing now, and you can see the fruit of our labors here um, as we play the game, and the bosses will come up. Now, eventually, I would want the bosses to count for the mini bosses to count for more points, maybe have more health, that kind of thing. But for now, like if I shoot him, he's going to give me the same amount of points as the other guys. But you can change that pretty easily in the if you go to the values in the if you look at enemy, he has a value here is the amount of score, and the boss basically inherits that. So in the initialize, you could just say value equals what did we set it at before? We had value. I don't know what we had. I guess that was in enemy CS add enemy. Let's see what we have for value. Our value is actually in the initialize of the enemy CS, which is overridden, so it's really easy. Actually, all we do is we call the base class here base.initialize, and that calls into enemy CS here, and it sets these values. But if you want to change them, you can always just call this again. You can always just call the value again and just say 200, for example. And now if I go in here and I play the game, I should see that I now have a mini boss that's worth twice the amount of the regular enemies. And here we go. Looks like that worked. Yep, it went from 800 to 1,000 there on that most recent hit. So it's all working. I'm going to zip this up and get it ready for you guys to get on the net. All right, see you next time.